This morning, Pastor Rob has asked me to kind of talk to you from the point of being a dad. You know, Pastor Rob is at this great stage of life where he's now more into the granddad role. He's not got young kids running around the place where I have. And if you were in the first service, you'd have seen that my 3 kids were all here running around, literally running around, causing a little bit of chaos. But they're not here this morning, so I'm going to show you guys a picture and just introduce them. Most of you will know them, but just in case you haven't, Dan, if we could flash that up, please. Dun, dun, dun. They are my 3 lovely children. So we have, in the middle there, we have Isla May, who is 8.5, going on about 15, by her attitude a lot of the time. Rupert, who's 6. And then we have Eve, who was 1 yesterday. I cannot believe it has been a year since she was born. And then my beautiful wife, Abby, on the end there. Us looking very rosy-cheeked in the snow back in February. So this morning I'm just going to talk to you about some of the lessons that I've learned from being a dad, you know. And I'll start by saying I've made a lot of mistakes kind of in my parenting. You learn on the job. There is no manual you get before having kids that tells you the right thing to do, because you try it and you go, that doesn't work. We've recently just got a puppy. And again, you read all this stuff that tells you how to be a good dad to a puppy, and then you try it and they just go, what are you trying? Get a grip. That ain't going to work. So you have to quickly adapt and overcome. So this morning, I'm just going to talk to you about a couple of the insights that I've learned that have not only helped me with my relationship with my kids, but also in my relationship with God. Because, you know, our relationship with God, we are in that child role and God is our dad. But, you know, we can learn from how we interact with our kids to how we interact with God. And what I want to talk about is about being in the present. Joy in the present. And, you know, the last year has been very interesting. You know, being at home 24/7, 365 days with my kids has been a learning curve. I think I've aged a lot over the last year, more than I probably did in the years before that. Because never before have I spent so much time at home with them, but I've learned so much about them. But one of the things I noticed, especially with Eve and her development, is we quite often are willing and wishing for the next stage of their development. So when Eve was born, you kind of enjoy the newborn bit, but then you're kind of excited for her to start moving around and exploring and making the noises and all the things that little babies do. And then when she starts rolling, you're kind of, oh, when are they going to crawl? And you're always looking, you know, when are they going to start crawling? And when they crawl, you start moving everything a few foot higher in the house, and then they start walking and pulling themselves up. And if any of you have seen Eve at the minute, she is fully mobile, fully active, all over the place, running around the joint, but really doesn't understand what we're saying to her. So now we're kind of waiting for her to start understanding and kind of being able to listen, and she started talking back. She's learned to say yeah and ta, and you're kind of always looking for that next stage of development. But often you can miss the joy of the moment because you're waiting for the next thing to come along. You kind of forget the joy of them being a baby. And you can sometimes do the flip side where you wish to go back to a stage because you really missed out on that stage. You think, oh, I wish they were back at that age. You know, how many parents, especially when they got to teenagers, probably wish their kids were a little bit younger? I know my mum did. And she'll probably be watching this later on Facebook. But I imagine she definitely did, because I was a bit of a handful as a teenager. Back to the days of being a doting little son, she probably wanted to go back to. But it's not just contained to, you know, our kids. Often we go through life. How many of us during the last year have wished for tomorrow? In the day you've gone, I just want today to be over and I want it to be tomorrow. How many of us are longing for June the 21st? How many of us are really looking on that day and just going, just June the 21st, I just need June the 21st to come, or maybe some of the earlier dates so you can, you know, meet up with a few friends, go to the beer garden, have a nice cold pint. You know, there's many in this country longing for that day. But the thing is, when we're often looking at and longing for a day, we forget about the moment, the present, and what's doing right now. You may not be that type of person, but you may be a person that's always looking back at yesterday, always thinking, oh, I wish I could have done a bit more with that time, or I wish I could have done a bit more with this and stuff, and longing back. But again, you're missing the present, the moment, anything to distract from the present moment. You know, some of us, we may not even be doing that, but life just passes us by. You know, you look back and gone, where's the last year gone? You know, it's literally, life has just passed you by. But I want to challenge us to be more present in the moment. And to be present, the present is the time that's associated with the event perceived directly the first time. Now, being present is about understanding it, seeing it the first time. It's not about recollection. It's not about playing it back. It's about being right here, right now. It is a state of active, open attention on the present instead of letting life pass you by. Mindfulness means living in the moment and the awakening to the experience. And that's where God wants us to be. He wants us to be in the present. But most of us have spent our entire lives looking for things in the future, scheduling stuff in the future, that we've forgotten how to enjoy the here and now. And I think even more so over the past year, where we're constantly looking for when things go back to normal. It's really taught us to more worry about what's coming up than what's happening right here and right now. And you know, the pandemic has been a thing that's stopped a lot of things happening, but actually it's also created a load of opportunities that we would never have had. You know, with Isla and Rupert, I didn't see all the stages of development. I didn't see all of their first because I was at work. I was, dad for a couple of hours a day before working in the evening, but I wasn't there all the time. But with Eve, I've seen every single first, and so have the other two. Isla and Rupert have also seen all of Eve's first, which, that's a blessing in itself. If we get lost in looking for when it goes back to normal, we would have missed that moment. But one of the reasons I've struggled with being in the present and living in the present is I am a natural born thinker. I'm also a fixer. So you start telling me a problem and straight away I'm starting thinking about it. I'm analysing what's going to happen tomorrow, how the past affects that, but also how I can fix it. And I forget what's going on right now. My brain has gone ding, 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 all over the place. Literally, that is how I work. And I have lost count of the amount of times Abby will say to me, "You're not listening. You're not listening." Because she's told me a problem and I'm trying to fix it. Or I'm analysing her past to work out why she's got the problem or where the problem's arisen from so I can help fix it. And I've forgotten what she's saying in the moment. And the problem might have been very small and she actually wanted to tell me something really deep and important. But my brain's off all over the place. So I have to learn to be more in the present. And what I've found from my own experiences is that living in this way, being distracted from the present moment, is tiring. It's very tiring to have your head always kind of going all over the place, trying to think about the future, thinking about yesterday. How can I fix it? How can I move on to the next thing? How can I, when's the next thing coming up? When's the next thing coming up? And it leads to a number of things. For me, it's led to sometimes kind of being unhealthy, both in my body and kind of in my relationships. Because, again, there's times where I said, "You're just not listening to me." And then that creates an unhealthy relationship and I have to make an adjustment. It also makes you unhappy because you're never enjoying the moment. You're constantly waiting for the next thing. You're constantly looking for the next thing to come along. And then when that thing comes, you don't enjoy it because you're looking for the next thing. And you're looking for the next thing. And actually you become unproductive. Because as much as I want to fix things, normally I'm quite unproductive at times because I'm too busy thinking about the next thing. I've never actually finished fixing it because I've moved on. I've already moved on before it's actually complete. So when we constantly live somewhere else, we fatigue our minds and our bodies. We tire ourselves out and we wonder why we have no energy to do the daily tasks. And on top of that, you become exhausted. You become stressed. That leaves you vulnerable to sickness, which only increases the worry and reinforces the cycle that I need to be worrying about tomorrow. And you end up in this vicious cycle going round and around and around. And our kids are especially aware when we're not present. They understand that. I have literally lost count of the amount of times that our kids have done this to us. So Abby and I, we maybe sat at home, we're on our phones looking at something, and one of the kids will ask us something, and we're not paying attention, and we say yes. And then suddenly about 2 seconds later, you realise what they asked and what you said yes to, and you quickly like, no, I didn't actually mean yes to that. I wasn't saying yes to that. And you have to quickly flip back into, I wasn't listening to you. And they're aware when you're not present, and they know it. They use it. Kids are intelligent. They will use it against us. They know if Eve's crying, if the dog's kicking off, if something's distracted, that's when they come and ask for a snack, even though they know they've been told no 100 times. That's when they know, because they know we're distracted and we're going to say yes. They know right then we're not in a place to have that conversation. So they're aware when you're not present in that moment. And one of the things I've noticed in my kind of walk with God and my walk with Jesus is often I can be crying out at a place in my life, wanting God's guidance. But because my mind is so busy thinking and looking for the future, I miss out on what he's saying because I'm not waiting to receive. I'm not in the moment to receive what God is going to say to me because I'm busy thinking about the next thing. I've had to really structure my quiet time to not just read the word and pray, but then to have moments where I sit and do nothing. Because typically my prayer time would look like I'd read the Bible, kind of give my petitions over to God, and then move on with my day. But I never waited for his response. I never gave opportunity for him to respond and then wondered why I wasn't getting the answers to my prayer. Because actually I'd moved on and I was already in the future. But God said, no, I want to meet you in the present moment. I've had to create that time to wait. And it's frustrating. it can be quite boring at times, sitting there waiting and going, come on, God. Come on, God. And sometimes, you don't get that, but it's creating the opportunities, that present moment. Equally, your kids can be crying out for your guidance, but if you're already somewhere else, consumed with work, another problem, friends, we miss out on the opportunity, and the kids will stop asking. They stop asking because they believe they're not important enough for your attention. They'll just stop coming to you for your guidance. They'll stop wanting to talk to you because they realize, mum and dad aren't present. Mum and dad don't really care. I'll stop asking. We don't want to be like that. So in my relationship with God, and many of you in your relationship with God, we've come to know Jesus as this amazing, awesome teacher. And when it comes to difficulties in our lives and areas we need guidance, most of us quite happy to go to Jesus when it's talking about sin. Quite happy to go to Jesus when we're learning about being more faithful, learning about loving one another. But we don't often consider the fact that Jesus is one of the best teachers on something else, and that is on living in the present. He is one of the best teachers on that, because God controls timing. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 1, and Dan will flash this up for you in a second, in the Amplified Classic Edition, says, "To everything there is a season, and there is a time for every matter and purpose under heaven." To everything there is a season and a time for every matter. God controls time, you don't. God controls time, you don't. The minute you realize that and can make that little click in your head, it just lets you off. You're not in charge of the 24 hours of the day. God is. God controls when things happen. And I found in my early Christian walk that I was so focused on the call of God and on the what and the how that I completely ignored the when. But God is interested not only in the what you do for him and the how you do it, but the when you do it for him. Because you've got to bring all three together. Because often you can be doing exactly what God has called you to do in the way he's called you to do it. If you do it in the wrong timing, you're on your own, pretty much. You can actually create some damage and things. And people have been in the wrong place at the wrong time, despite thinking they've heard a call from God, and have left themselves into some tricky situations. You've got to get the combination of all three right together, And one of the things that God has been talking to me about is that we aren't intended to divide our focus between today and tomorrow. We're not made to focus on today and tomorrow. We're told to focus on today. Matthew 6:34. "So do not worry or be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will have worries and anxieties of its own. Sufficient for each day is its own trouble." I think many Christians don't live that way. We fret about yesterday, worry about tomorrow, and then try and get through today as quick as possible. But God is saying, do not be anxious or worry about tomorrow. Leave tomorrow to me, he's saying. Leave tomorrow to me. Tomorrow I'll talk to you about tomorrow. Today, let's talk about today. Tomorrow is for tomorrow. Today is for today. And it's all too easy for us to think, well, God, that's pretty easy for you. Jesus, that was easy for you to say. You're God. Of course it's going to be easy for you not to fret and not to worry. What have you got to worry about? And God doesn't have what's on my plate. And if I ask you to take some paper now and write down all the things that are on your plate right now, all the things you may be thinking about and worrying about, most of us will come up with a pretty long, comprehensive list. Some of your list may include you maybe thinking about what you're going to have for lunch in an hour's time. We're all so easily distracted by just what's coming next. And our plates can be so big. You may have some real big things that you're walking through right now. Work, family, what you're having for lunch. The kids' uniform's ready for school tomorrow. And that's one of the things on a Sunday that goes through my mind, and I have to stop that distraction coming in. What have I got to do when I get home? And Jesus was the Son of God, but he was also fully human. And he was tempted with the same temptations we are. And he had a lot to worry about. Jesus knew that he was going to be put to death. So he understood that. It wasn't something God dropped on him the day before it's going to happen. It wasn't something that came up and snuck up on him he wasn't aware of. Jesus knew the whole time on his ministry life on earth, he was going to be put to death. He knew the nature of his death, the agonizing pain of what was going to happen to him. He knew the horrifying nature of it all. And he knew the upcoming physical torture of being separated from his Father in heaven. He knew that that was coming along. He knew he was going to be emotionally betrayed by his friends. Yet, he was able to be present in every single day and walk with peace. How many of us, if we knew all of that was going to happen to us in a few years' time or even a week's time, would be walking in peace? Probably not. So, Jesus had a lot to worry about, but he understood how to walk in peace and walk in the present. And in Luke 24:44, it says, and being in the agony of mind, he prayed all the more earnestly and intently that his sweat became like great clots of blood dropping upon the ground. This is Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, moments before he's going to be betrayed by his friends and taken off. Interesting, this is the only time we see him praying like this, in this kind of the agony of what's going to happen, being physically aware of what's going on. He knew about it 3 years before. Didn't see him praying about it in his early ministry. Didn't see him asking the disciples to pray with him about what was going to happen. And he waited to the moment. He responded to the event, but on the right time, on the right day. So Jesus understood how to be present. Go back 3 days from that moment. What was he doing? Riding on a donkey. Smiling, waving, rejoicing with everyone in town. So again, shows you he learned how to live in the moment and be present. Many of us would not be riding on a donkey, waving, enjoying, if we knew in 3 days' time what was going to happen to us. We would not be able to do that. But God does. The idea that he could be filled with joy just days before his crucifixion, that's pretty astounding, isn't it? It's pretty amazing that he was able to do that. And he had that amazing peace. But he can help us live in that peace and help us live in the present. And this morning I want to give you 2 keys that I found in both kind of how I parent my kids and my relationship with God that's allowed me to be more present. And the first thing is that you look at the life of Jesus. He was purposeful in his daily need to be connected. He was purposeful in his daily need to be connected. Mark 1:35. And it says, in the morning, long before daylight, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. Jesus understood that in order to be present and tackle what was ahead of him, he had to be connected to God and understand what God was saying for that day. What I imagine Jesus' prayer life would have looked like is he probably would have got up early, gone and prayed to God. He probably would have handed over yesterday to God. Yesterday's done. Let yesterday be gone. And he'd have said to God, where are we going today? What are we doing? Again, we know that he never did anything he didn't see the Father do. So he's constantly talking to God and finding out, what needs to happen. So Jesus was constantly checking in with God. And, some of you will have Pastor Rob say that long time ago now, it feels like a very long time ago, when I was 16, I joined the Navy. And that was my kind of first job, my first career at a school. And I served as a medic in the Navy for 6 and a bit years. And one of the jobs I had was I worked at Lympstone down in Devon, which is where the Royal Marines train. And I did a lot of kind of medical cover for their big events. And the final task before you become a Royal Marine is you have to basically trek 30 miles across Dartmoor in 8 hours. With full kit, weapon and everything. And it's a pretty big old feat. But one of the things I observed when these guys were doing it is they weren't started off at a point and said, right, we'll see you in 8 hours' time, 30 miles over here. Crack on, enjoy, lads. Hope you make it. If you don't, you're out of the Royal Marines. No. When they started that walk, because I did one of the walks with them, is they were constantly checking in every mile, every couple of miles to make sure a few things. They were constantly checking in with the training team around them. It wasn't a case of 30 miles, off you go, see you guys later. They built in this culture of constantly checking in. And what it allowed them to do is 3 things, 3 very important things. Is number 1, check the direction they were going. The problem is if you don't check in regularly and check your direction, you may think you're heading straight back. But you could be going like this way. And right now, I'm out of shot of a camera. The people on the live stream can't see me. Because I haven't checked my direction. I've just been walking. But by checking in regularly, checking your direction, I could have taken 1 step and realised, okay, I'm slightly out. Little adjustment. Too often in our walk with God, we think we've heard where God's saying and we're going. And actually, we could be miles off where God's want us to be. And by regularly, daily checking in, we can check we're going in the right direction still. We can make sure we're going in the right direction. And I didn't say this to the first service, but it just came back to me during worship. I've had to make sure that's a practice in our life. When we first moved to Eastbourne, we had an idea of what the next few years looked like. We believed we were going to come to Eastbourne, spend a couple of years in the church here, go off to Manchester, join the church plant then, and then go and plant our own church. So that was our plan. And, if we hadn't been constantly checking in with God, we could have been somewhere very different right now, probably well out of where God wanted us and his will. And we would have been completely in the wrong place. But by that constant checking in and checking our direction, it allows us to always make sure we're going the way God wants us to do, to make sure we can make them small little adjustments. And it's easy to go like that. Don't really notice it. Where you're over here and you realise you should have been over there. That's a lot more effort to get back over there, and that can be the same in our lives. So number one, by regularly checking in, it allows you to check you're on the same direction. Number two, it allows the guys to make sure they're all on the same page. So one of the things when they did the check-ins is they'd all huddle around and just make sure everyone understood where they were going, everyone understood their roles, make sure everyone was doing okay, any injuries, any things that needed to be addressed. And they checked they were all on the same page before they set out again. And again, it's a good practice to check you're all on the same page. You can do it with your family, just making sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone understands what's going to be happening. It's something we do with our kids before we go out, just make sure we all know what we're doing. And it's not a prescribed thing. It's not we go for a checklist in our agenda, are we all on the same page? It's just making sure we all know what's going to happen, what we're going to do, making sure everyone knows what they're asked to do in their role. And the final thing is you can get important updates. I remember doing the med cover for one of these walks, and the intended route had to be changed because there'd been a landslip down one of the ravines, and some rocks had fallen down during the time the guys are out on the ground. So it meant the directing staff and the team there had to really kind of just change directions and on the fly navigate a new route. Now, if these guys hadn't been constantly checking in, they'd have walked merrily into a landslide, not been able to get up, would have missed their further checkpoints, would have not passed in the time and would not be Royal Marines. But by checking in regularly, they were able to get the important updates. And, on this note, important updates. How many of you have got Apple devices? How many of you are heathens and love the God of Apple? No. Apple devices. If you've got an Apple device, you'll notice that every now and then Apple wants to give you an update. And when that update arrives on your phone or your laptop, you get two choices. You get to update now or later. And many of us like to press later. Because it's an inconvenience right now when I'm on my phone. My kids on their iPads are terrible for it. They do not want to interrupt that YouTube session to take an update. No, I'm not interested in that. Update later, update later, update later, update later. To the point where occasionally I check them and go, wow, it's been a few months since these iPads have been updated, and it takes a little while to get an update. But the reason Apple is pushing, or your phone manufacturer is pushing out an update to you, is because often they've identified a security flaw, an error or a bug that means your phone has become vulnerable, and they want to fix it. But by pressing later, 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 you're allowing that gap just to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you're not fixing the vulnerabilities. And it's exactly the same with God. Many of us in our relationships, as I said, in my daily prayer life, I was effectively pressing update later because I'd finish my time and move on to my next task. I wasn't allowing myself to receive the update, to check, is there anything I need to know? Is there any vulnerabilities that I'm not aware of? Is there something God's telling me that I need to be aware of for that day? We need to stop pressing update later with God. Same with our kids. Often your kids want to tell you something. You go, I'm just busy, I'm just busy, I'm just busy, I'm just busy. But actually, we've got to listen to them. We've got to be willing to take that update and learn some new stuff about them. So stop hitting update later. So without the checking in, without constantly checking in, it's all too easy to find yourself lost, alone, going in the wrong direction, doing something that's no longer needed, or unaware of potential dangers. I found in my walk with God and in being in church life, there's a lot of Christians that are doing good things for God, but it's not exactly where God wants them. Often God will give you a task to start. Doesn't always mean you've got to finish it. I've learnt that the hard way. There's many tasks where God has given me that I am not called to finish. I'm called to start, or I'm called to be a part of, but actually there's an opportunity then for someone else to rise up and take over. There's an opportunity for someone else to rise up. Pastor Rob's doing that this morning. He could very easily be preaching every single week, in the church here, and I love his preaching. But without the opportunity for me to do it, how do then I grow? How do I reach my potential? So again, we've got to make sure we're constantly checking and listening to what God is saying to know, okay, is my time to lay this down coming? Is it someone else's time to raise up and take over this role for me? So number one, back to point one, is that Jesus was purposeful in his daily need to be connected. And number two, and these are all linked, is Jesus took care of his soul. Jesus knew his limits and he put in place boundaries. Luke 5:15-16 says, "But despite Jesus' instructions, the report of his power spread even faster, and the vast crowds came to hear him and preach and to be healed of their diseases. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer." So Jesus was not available 24/7, so neither should you be. Jesus was not available 24/7, so neither should you be. He understood the importance of looking after himself in order to be fully present with the people when he was doing the work of the ministry. He knew that he had to be well within himself in order for him to have the power he needed to have to minister to the people. It's quite fascinating you see that Jesus didn't wait till the whole crowd, till everyone had been healed, till everyone had been ministered before he went away. He withdrew from the crowd. There were probably still people waiting in the prayer line, if we relate it to one-day church practices. But he went off because he realized I'd hit a limit. I needed some time away with God. I needed to process some of this. I needed to spend some time with God. I needed to go to prayer. And he withdrew himself from the crowd and went off into the wilderness. And he knew that because he knew if he was burnt out, if he was exhausted, if he was running on fumes, he was going to be no good to anyone. So he understood the importance of soul care. Matthew 14:23 says, "After sending them home, he went up to the hills by himself to pray. Night fell, and he was there alone." Again, he sent them home and went off to look after himself. He sent them home, went off to look after himself. Mark 12:30-31. Most of us will know this passage, we'll know it well. "And you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and all your strength." The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these. Love your neighbor as yourself. Too often Christians are focused on the love your neighbor and neglected as yourself. You've got to be well in yourself in order to love your neighbor. If you're not well, if you're exhausted, if you're stressed, if you're running on fumes, how can you love your neighbor well? You can't. You've got to be well within yourself in order to love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as you loved yourself. And Jesus was the greatest example of that. He was love, and yet he walked away from crowds at times. He withdrew to look after himself, to prioritize his own personal soul care above the needs of a crowd, above the needs of the people he'd come to save. At times, he withdrew because he knew he couldn't be all people to all. He couldn't be all man to everyone. He couldn't be there all the time. So he learned that. Jesus had personal needs, and he put a priority on them. Now, he had to eat, he had to sleep, and he prioritized them. He did stop for dinner. He did stop for sleep. He wasn't a man like an action man running 24/7. He didn't do that. He did have to do the things we needed to do. And at times, people got annoyed by him. I imagine there'd have been crowds going, "Oh, I've waited all this time to see Jesus, and he's just gone off into the wilderness." But he knew his limits. He knew how to put boundaries in place in order for him to be what he needed to be. And maybe you need to prioritize your own soul care. Maybe you need to learn to say no in order to be a better parent, to be a better husband, to be a better worker for your boss. You need to learn to say no to some things so you can spend a little bit of me time, look after yourself so that you can be a better parent. I know for me that I am a better dad when I've had a bit of time in the week to go out for a run and just spend a bit of time by myself and kind of get some headspace in there. It allows me to be a better dad, and that's important. But we can feel the pressure of wanting to always be there, that we don't create these practices. Jesus lived a rhythm of life that kept him free from burnout, but beyond that, it kept him full of grace, full of truth, ready to be compassionate, to be present, to respond to the need, to any crisis and interruption. But he wasn't living at a manic pace of life. He wasn't living, running on red all the time, 100 miles an hour, that left no room for self. He was living at a very easy pace of life. He was full of peace going about his life. And how many of us would love to be at that place where we are full of peace in our life, living in the present, enjoying every moment, knowing that tomorrow's for tomorrow, but I'm going to focus on today. Jesus didn't live defensive, overextending himself, getting more and more tired, and then taking a break. How many of us has that been the story of our life? We work. Finally, something snaps, and then you realise I've got to adjust it. We work. Something snaps, we make an adjustment. Jesus didn't do that. He didn't even get to that point. He was aware of the importance of looking after himself. He made the adjustments. He withdrew. He spent time by himself, spent time with his Father in heaven, in that daily connection with God in order to be what he needed to be. He was consistent and proactive in that. And another thing I saw in the Gospels is that Jesus wasn't always nice to people. Again, most of us don't like that. Jesus is love. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Of course Jesus was nice to everyone. No, he wasn't. He didn't do what they wanted him to do all the time. He didn't do that. He didn't always do what people wanted him to do. Again, how many people would have got hacked off of him walking out from a crowd? He didn't always do what people wanted him to do. And he didn't always help everyone. And again, sometimes in Christian life, you can find you feel there's a need to help and fix every single person. But Jesus didn't. Jesus knew his limits. He knew his boundaries. He knew what he could do. And some of it he handed over to his team, and you'll see that happen in this church where, you may want to spend some time with Pastor Rob, but he'll hand you off to one of the connect groups because Rob knows his own boundaries and knows the team he's got around him. But he didn't do everything that everyone expected. So again, as a Christian, we need to be aware that we can say no. Sometimes people will throw it back in your face. Oh, you're supposed to be the Christian. You're supposed to love your neighbor. Saying no is a way of loving your neighbor because you're looking after yourself in order so you can be a better neighbor every single day rather than in that one moment, and then you may lose it the next time they ask you to help. So it's about learning the importance of no, learning how to spend time in the present and be present where we want to be. Understanding these things about Jesus helped me to learn to say no. And it's healthy and holy to say no sometimes. Some of you find it really hard to say no. I know, obviously, when you live with someone, you kind of learn their ways and means. And Abby is so much more a people person than I am. And that's one of her struggles. She struggles to say no sometimes because she just wants to see everyone and meet everyone and please everyone. But we've learned the importance of being able to say no. Sometimes, no, we haven't got time to do that. No, we haven't. We can't make that social occasion. Or no, we can't be involved. And, what we've learned is to say no and then actually fully step back from that. What I've seen people do is they'll say no and then actually spend the whole time looking at Facebook to see if the people that went are still having a good time. So they're actually involved in the event, despite actually not physically being there. And that's not saying no. That's just basically not being there by proxy. So you need to learn to say no and remove yourself. Withdraw yourself. It's biblical. It's what Jesus did to withdraw himself, to get a bit of time for you. It's okay to have a bit of you time. God wants to have a bit of you time. He wants that. He's made us that way. So a lot of us face the problem of creating boundaries because we're just living for the next thing, for the next thing, for the next thing. I had it this week. Rupert and I had to go up to London for his regular checkup at his hospital there. And, it'd been a busy day. We'd been on the train all day, seeing lots of doctors. And, he'd had a few tests. And he normally sees the physio up there, and he quite enjoys that because she makes him hop around and do crazy stuff on different legs. And he finds that quite exciting. So we'd had a really busy day, got back off the train in Eastbourne. And all I wanted to do was get home. I was thinking about what am I going to cook for dinner, thinking about how many emails had I not checked that day because I'd had the day off work, and what was I going to do that evening, and how was the kids, how was the dog, had the dog destroyed the house while Abby was out, and all this stuff was going on in my mind. And I was just like, right, I just need to get to the next point, which is getting home. And we were just about to walk over the road to get a bus, and Rupert said to me, Dad, can we walk home, because I enjoyed walking? I was like, yeah, certainly we can. And that moment I had a choice to make. I could be in the present and listen to what he was saying, or I could switch on. Actually, I've got things to do, and I just want to get home, mate. Love the fact you want to walk, but let's just get home. And I chose to spend 35 minutes and walk home with my son. And we had some of the best conversation we've had in a long time, just talking about random stuff, Fortnite. The boy's got so much knowledge on a game he's never, ever played in his entire life. Literally, he has never played the game, and yet he was telling me all about the seasons, the weapons, the people, what you do. I was like, all right, mate, this is great. If you've never played the game, I was like, how would you know all of this? Because he's like, I've watched videos on it, I've read about it. I was like, happy days. And we just connected. We just bonded. And I learned to be present in that moment. Yes, it took 35 minutes longer than it would have done if we'd just got a bus or a taxi home. Yes, it meant a few things in my day were knocked on. But that made his day. We'd had a great day. We'd spent some time together. And he was just full of beans when he got home. And it was great for him. We had some exercise as well. It just ticked so many boxes. But if I hadn't been purposeful about listening to what he's saying and being present in that moment, I would have missed that and said, I'm sorry, mate, we just got to move on to the next thing. I've just got to go to the next thing. I've just got to go to the next thing. And like Rupert asking me to spend a bit of time, God is often crying out to spend a bit of time with you. He wants to go on that walk with you. He wants to spend that time with you, just engaging, just talking, just learning about, I hardly said a single word on that walk home. Didn't really, because I didn't understand what the heck he was talking about 90% of the time. I hardly said a word. But he just loved being able just to talk to me and kind of me just nod along, go, oh, that sounds great, mate. Yeah, it sounds amazing. And he got so much out of that. And it's the same with God. God loves it when you're telling him about your day, when you're talking to him about what's going on in your family, your workplace, whatever it is. And he just loves it. And he's just there as a dad, as I was looking down, just full of a massive smile because I'm spending time with my son. And we're both really enjoying it. And that's what God wants to do with you. But it only happens when we're present in the moment. When we come to God with our list of the stuff we need for tomorrow, the stuff we're worried about from yesterday, we miss that present moment. Jesus knew how to live each day to its fullest. He got the most out of every single day, despite the fact he said no to things, despite the fact he spent time alone, despite the fact he'd have had dinner, would have slept. He still got the full amount out of every single day. He was able to make every hour count and to be present in it. And even the time he spent resting in God, he was fully present, causing it to refresh him as it was meant to do so he could go on and tackle the next task. There's so much we can learn from Jesus' example about how to become more and more present, both as a parent, as a friend, as a husband, wife, as a worker, but also in our relationship with Jesus. Me learning to just be more present with my kids and stuff has allowed me to become a better follower of Jesus, to have a better relationship with Jesus, because I take care of my soul a bit more than I used to. I make sure that, I'm in a good place. I've had that. It's okay. There'll be occasions where Abby says to me, you need to go for a run, don't you? I'm like, yes, I do. Because she can see that I'm coming to a limit, and she knows that I just need half an hour just to get out and just enjoy a bit of nature. And that does the trick. She understands the importance of soul care for me, and I look out for it for her. And I'm purposeful in my daily connection to God, my daily connection to my wife, and my daily connection to my kids. And these things allow me to live present in the moment. So I want to encourage you this week, have a challenge. Think about, when you're spending time with your wife, your kids, with God. Are you present, or are you just looking for the next thing? Are you just waiting for the next moment? Are you truly present in that moment? Stop hitting update later. Let God give you the download. Let God tell you what he needs to tell you. Don't hit update later. And constantly check in. Am I in the right direction, God? Am I going the right way? Is this where you need me? Am I going the right place? Am I going the right place? And you'll be amazed what he'll talk to you about, how he'll address you, how he'll kind of just teach you the ways he wants to go. And you'll have some amazing times with God, but you've got to be present. We all talk about, did you feel the presence of God in a church service? You can only feel the presence if you're present. Those people on the live stream typically won't feel the same presence as in the physical building because they're not present. You only feel the presence when you're present, and that is the importance of being present. Lots of tenses there that my brain is getting confused about, but you can only feel the presence when you're present. So I'm going to pray, and let's encourage God to help us this week to be more and more present. Father God, I thank you for the example that we have in your son. I thank you that he just was just the greatest example of being present and living every day to the fullest. And God, I pray that you encourage us and show us how we can live each day to the fullest, getting the most out of each day. Lord God, help us to be fully present in every single moment, every interaction with our kids, with our family, with our husband, with our wife, with the people we work with, the people we meet in the street. Help us to always be fully present in the moment, because we've put the steps in place to be connected to you daily, to understand what you're saying, where you want us to go, the updates that you want to give us, and we've taken care of our soul. Lord God, help us to put in place boundaries, to put in place limits, to know how far we can go, how much of ourselves we can give before we need a bit of time out, before we need a refresh, before we need to spend a bit more time with you, just to get topped back up, ready to go out and continue doing the mission that you've called us to do, which is to love our neighbour as we love ourselves. Help us just to love ourselves more so that we can love our neighbours even better, Lord God. So help us to do that this week. Help us to be more and more present in every single interaction we have. And God, I pray these guys have a blessed week as they learn to be more and more present. Amen.